Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China's State Council has unveiled plans to vastly restructure the government to the ongoing 14th National People's Congress. According to the plan, there will be a revamp of the Science and Technology Ministry, the formation of a financial regulatory body, and a National Data Bureau, among other changes. Why did China decide to optimize the structure? What about the timing? And what would be the impacts of the reforms? To take a closer look, I'm glad to be joined by Professor Liu Baochen from the University of International Business and Economics, Hong Hao, Chief Economist of Grow Investment Group, and Andy Mock, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the discussion. Baochen, I will start with you from this studio here. What is the purpose of the reform? What do you make of it?
Well, actually, the tone and direction was set forth by the Party Congress resolution to go for Chinese modernization in its new era, meaning that we're not only going for technological modernization, industry, and agriculture, but rather to strengthen with a focus on the level of governance and systematic structure for Chinese institutions. So under which we have seen two directions. One is really ascending, meaning that some of the functions have been centralized to the State Council, and which used to lay in different bureaus and the ministries. And the other is descendancy, where many of those managerial technologies and operation are really pushed down so that they get close to the market and get close to the grassroots utility. And so the entire framework is to streamline. If we quote the Bible, it is really give back Caesar's what is Caesar's and give back God what is God's. So it's a streamlining and optimization process.
Okay, streamlining and optimization process. Hong Hao, how necessary are those proposed reforms?
Well, I think over the years there have been a number of institutional reform by the State Council, and I think this time around, we focus on reducing some of the headcounts in some of the departments, and also aggregating some of the financial regulatory functions amongst many different departments and roll into one into a central sort of a supervisory body. So I think over the years, people have been looking forward to it. All right. So in the past couple of years, we combined CBRC and CBRC and CIRC on regulatory body, and now that we're combining three of them into one more powerful super regulatory body. So I think it is not completely a surprise to the market, and I think it's going to make the regulatory job more efficient.
More efficient. Of course, the senior official said that the purpose is to strengthen science and technology, data management, of course, the work of the elderly. Andy Mock, what do you think of these proposals?
Well, I think they're very timely. And one thing to point out is, this question of why is this happening? And I think one important reason is that because the party and the government can engage in this fairly significant institutional reform, because we know that bureaucracies, especially government bureaucracies, are notoriously difficult to reform or institute any sort of structural change. And one of the, I think, strengths of the Chinese system is that it is actually able to adapt to both new challenges and new opportunities. So if we look on the financial services side, one question or issue that has been recognized is this problem of regulatory arbitrage, where, to use a family example, you play mom and dad off each other. So mom said this, and dad said that. So now with a unification that eliminates this problem and makes it a more stable system. When we look at data, the government has recognized that data is a new factor of production, and therefore needs new institutions, new policies, to take advantage of the opportunities as well as deal with some of the challenges of it as well. So I think, why are we seeing this, and, is it effective, is that, I think China has the ability to envision and implement these sort of structural reforms on a reasonably regular basis, and when the need arises, it can do it.
Well, let's start to take a look at some of the reforms in the Bochum. If you look at this reshuffle of the Ministry of Science and Technology, for example, some of its functions are actually allocated to other ministries. For example, the agriculture technology, for example, is given basically to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. So here, how do you see this basically reduction actually of some of its powers?
Yeah, that's why I call it the descending part, where some of the practical technologies are being pushed down for practical application, and that can really be easily translated into market value, and they can easily be taken advantage at the end point, at the downstream. So not only the agricultural technology, but also you can see the biotech are pushed more to the Ministry of the Public Health, where because right now, in view of the past painful experience of the pandemic, biotech is definitely the breakthrough in the health conservation and in the cure solution. So therefore, it is clearly targeted. Instead of the one ministry of the science and technology taking overall, and they are actually alleviated of the burden of practical application, but being able to concentrate more resources on the coordination of science breakthroughs and support the basic research, and also to manage and supervise the successful use of the budget from the government coffer. And so this is really, they make a lot more sense as being more rationalized, and people within the circle, they really hooray to such sort of change.
So Hong Hao, some say this, in particular, the reshuffle of the Ministry of Science and Technology, it has something to do with, for example, the technology containment from Washington on Beijing, for example, the chips and other advanced technologies. Somehow China has to rely on itself to improve the innovation, in particular indigenous innovation in this country. So will such reshuffle somehow help that kind of target?
Yeah, well, I think the reshuffle sort of put the technology development into the center focus, right? So back then, even though China has been sort of paying increasingly more attention to technological development, but I mean, obviously, it has to be a coordinated effort. And now that the rivalry is on, and also in the technology arena, nowadays technology is developing very, very fast. So you need to commit more resources, probably more human power, and also you need a central coordination of all the different parts that is coming together. So I think in a way, because of the timing of the Washington announcement, it makes people sort of think that China is doing this in responding to what the U.S. was doing. But I think in a way, yes. But then I think more so, it is a sort of a reform by itself that China needs to further its technology development going forward.
Well, Andy, will a streamlined Ministry of Science and Technology help the country focus on research and development and more investment in this area? And then it will help the country to achieve its goals, to rely more on its own technology here?
Well, I think it's certainly a positive step because, as we all know, when you try to do too many different things, it can be difficult to do any of them well. So one way we can understand this particular reform is that it increases the clarity and the focus for the Ministry of Science and Technology. So it's very clear. I agree that it's in response, in part, but not entirely, to the challenge posed by the United States. But also, we shouldn't forget that China all along, for decades, has talked about achieving a certain greatness that was historical nature, as well as playing a greater role on the global stage in terms of technology. So I think these factors certainly play into this move towards greater clarity and focus in the science and technology area.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bolton, you mentioned, go ahead. You mentioned,
Yeah.
people in this circle, they hooray, welcome the changes. In what sense, they are happy to see the changes?
One is that actually scientists, previously they got puzzled that, how the science support money be allocated. And actually there has been corruption and cheating, admittedly. And so now it's made being more transparent when the power is more centralized and coordinated. Mm-hmm. Number two is that there are 8 key national labs that needs better coordination, because for scientific breakthrough, you don't start from square one, for all the institutions. So they have to climb ladder by ladder. And so the coordination and transparency is most important. The third is that, how we can really conduct the international exchange. It doesn't mean that we are going to have complete autonomy and doing research on closed doors. So manifestly during the reshuffle program, we also make sure that the Ministry of Science and Technology are there responsible for international collaboration. So on one hand, we got to be prepared for any type of choke points that might be created by international tension, but we are still opening our full arm to collaborate with the world, and more importantly, as how we can really attract more global talent pool to help China to achieve many of those breakthroughs that we desperately need.
Well, that's important. On one hand, you want to increase your self-reliance. At the same time, I mean, China has remained committed to globalization in the sense, even in the area of
Exactly.
tech and science.
And also in the same time, we export a lot of technology to many of the Belt and Road countries, particularly over the practical technologies, which really help a great deal, because many of those countries do not need the super cutting edge technology. Mm-hmm. They just need to amplify their practical utility. And that's, we can see that over the past 1 decade, Chinese technological content and also technology transfer are being on accelerated basis to export to many other countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andy, interestingly, as Bolton has said, this transfer or the flow of technology seems to be a natural part of cooperation or trade investment among countries. But now, of course, we have this, the practice from Washington that is to contain China, in particular high-tech sector. So this will impair or affect this global supply chain or global value chain here?
No, it absolutely has a negative impact on global supply chains. But I think also it has an impact on holding back human progress overall. Because when countries can work together to advance the technological frontier, all of mankind benefits. So, this is, again, I think, a very destructive thing, that this path the U.S. is pursuing, that it can not only lead to conflict, but it actually is holding back human progress. At the same time, we have to recognize that the world is much larger than the United States, and as Bao Cheng talked about, China is actually a provider of products and technology to many countries around the world, whether that's Africa, whether that's Southeast Asia, and perhaps now the Middle East as well, with some of the recent announcements based on President Xi's trip there last year, that the world is still moving forward, not as quickly as it could if the U.S. were to play a more productive and cooperative role. But at the same time, this is a challenging situation for China to deal with these technological obstacles being thrown up by the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think actually I recently wrote an article that technological restriction over trade is suicidal, because you need, for such a breakthrough technology, you need a big amount of money to support the package, to support the human package, and also the equipment, etc. And actually America succeeded in the leadership of technology breakthrough simply because they are able to commercialize on a larger scale on the globe of their technology. Now, if they restrict the sales, and then they cannot really bring the right return on investment into the R&D, and in the end, people will be disincentivized to work on those breakthroughs. So this way, they are going to really obstruct the loop of feeding back into science and research. And a second thing is that technology has a lifetime, limited lifetime. So I still remember in the A River Runs Through It, where it's starred by Brad Pitt, and he said he loves his boot so much until he didn't wear it until his feet grow out of the boots. So now you keep the technology on the shelf without really commercialize it, and one day it's getting useless.
Well, that's true. Hong Hao, with these proposed reforms in mind, are you confident that China will be able to overcome the choke points and then, I would say, probably move into the next stage of a rather smooth development, with the investment, with the talents, and with this market? I mean, there's a tremendous size of the market.
Yes, I think given the history, China has a really good chance, to achieve technological breakthrough in the next decades. After a very coordinated efforts is being thrown to solve the problem, and also beyond resource mobilization, to develop new technology, but also we're building out a soft infrastructure as well. So for example, we're putting more money into educating people, right? So and also I think nowadays many of the universities. They invest a lot in R&D. I think the R&D budget by some of the Chinese university is actually one of the highest in the world, if I were not mistaken. So I think it's more than a sort of a bureaucracy reform. There's a lot more to it. There's a human side of the reform as well. And I think besides capital, right? So development of human capital is also essential to the next stage technological breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. If this reform over science and technology to strengthen that sector, and then you see the reforms in the financial sector, Hong Hao, you have been in this sector for a long time. Tell us, what are the reforms? What's your response to those financial, new regulatory reforms there?
Yeah, well, I think now we have a one super regulatory body, right? So the CSRC has been elevated, its status in the overall organizational structure, and also it will be responsible for bond issuance by enterprises as well, which is used to be taken care of by the NDRC, which makes the structure sort of more smooth, in a sense that all the securities are now being regulated by one regulatory body, and also CBRC and CIRC. These are regulatory body that is overseeing the banking and insurance industry, but then increasingly, because the financial market is getting more and more sophisticated, right? So many of the structured financial products actually involve banking, securities, and insurance, right? So it's a portfolio of financial products that we're dealing with. So if you're trying to regulate such a product by three different regulatory bodies, it's bound to create confusion. All right. So now we elevated the CSRC under the total umbrella of the State Council, and then it's taking care of the CBRC and CIRC as well. Then that way, I would say that it can achieve better regulatory result, and also over time, because you have so many different regulatory bodies going around, people sort of get confused, right? So if I have such a matter, who should I report to, et cetera, et cetera. And also, the PBOC is going through a significant reform as well. So it's turning into a provincial-based PBOC branch structure instead of the structure by 9 very large districts. And in so doing, it makes lineate the regulatory sort of a reporting line of different levels within the PBOC. So I think in the market, people have been sort of anticipating this, because over the years, some of us, we sometimes we do get confused, right? So that's where the consultants come in, right? So we pay huge consulting fees just to figure out who is doing what. So I think now, everything is becoming clearer. So there's better guidance, one super regulatory body that is in place, and that is something that we financial industry has been anticipating for some time now.
Then how do you compare the Chinese structure right now, as in the proposal, to say more financially advanced countries like the UK or the US here?
Yeah, I think it's modernized, right? So in the US, you have the SEC that is regulating the securities industry, right? So that is very similar to now the CSRC status within the Chinese government. Then I think the PBOC is similar to the Fed, in the sense that it is one of the most powerful central banks in the world, right? So it actually determines the ups and downs of business cycle. So I think the PBOC now, probably have more instruments and sort of a more clear structure for it to execute its monetary policy. For example, there used to be a financial stability office, and then another sort of a financial. I don't know how to translate it, but they're like two bureaus, within the same province or within the same city, right? So they're dealing with different things. And so, when you want to execute a order, it sort of takes time to figure out, for people to figure out, which department they should go into, right? So now, this sort of confusion is gone. So I think it will make it even more efficient for the PBOC to execute its policy.
So Andy, we are talking about, for example, the newly, according to the proposal, a new National Financial Regulatory Commission will replace the banking watchdog and other supervision of the industry apart from the securities. Basically, we are talking about a market, with the banking and insurance assets of 400 trillion yuan, or 57.7 trillion US dollars. So, it's clear. Obviously, it's necessary to streamline and reinforce probably the regulatory body here.
No, it absolutely is, Qingduo. So it's not only the size, but also the importance of this sector to the economy, society in China, and increasingly to the world. So I think one of the key words here is stability. And as we heard from some of the other guests today, of course, this makes it more efficient for market players, that there's one agency, there's maybe less confusion, it's easier to know what the exact rules are and how to follow them. But at the same time, from a government perspective, again, it provides greater clarity as well. And we all know that financial crises can be devastating. So again, I come back to this word stability as the financial markets in China continue to get larger and larger, but also increasingly important and increasingly fast-paced as well.
Well, Bolton, as Andy mentioned about, part of the purpose obviously is to prevent potential financial crisis, and we do see at least the local crises. For example, the rural banks or some of the local banks, bankruptcy or other serious issue. The government does not want to see the crisis becomes larger or become national. So maybe part of the purpose here to prevent a potential crisis here.
Yeah, we can see that many of the local governments are under financial distress. One reason is that they used to rely too much on land concessions. They collect from the real estate developers, and when China tightened the zoning law and land control, the concession was greatly reduced. So therefore, the lending through the what is termed as the City Development Corporation was really magnified to the point that they begin to support the government budget, which is really something going beyond the rail. And the other thing is that many of those developers are really creating a huge debt hole within those commercial banks. And this is really, at least for quite a long time, escaped the supervision of the central banking authorities. So now that is why they really wanted to streamline all this, so that they bring a better transparency and shorten the reporting line, and so that the Chinese money circulation can be more under control, and so that the local government will be more disciplined to live to the budget. And if they have difficulty, they can really inform the superior organization or superior government, so that they can really get some tax transfer or at least some alleviation program. But instead of doing shadow banking, instead of the abusive borrowing from the local banks. So I think this is the right way. And the other is that by streamlining the control, you can see that it used to be PBOC was taking care of the consumer interest, and then the security board was taking care of the investors' interest. Actually, they are really the two sides of one coin. So why don't you? Yeah, why don't you?
People.
Right. Why don't you just put it in one hand?
Yes.
So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Right. And of course, there's also the downsides for this. Headcounts by 5% of the government institutions. What is the purpose and what's the justification? And at the same time, we are having the formation of new ministries, basically, about here.
I think they try to earn room for reshuffling the cabinet for better efficiency and also better central control. And so on one hand, they create many other new government agencies, and also they promoted some of the social affiliates into the public offices under the payroll of the central government. And on the other, they really wanted to have a downsize of 5% of the public servant quota. So this is really a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. And then, so therefore, this extra quota will be used to support more of the key areas, which is more of a future-driven. For example, in the new data bureau we have created, and in strengthening intellectual property protection, and also in more of the supervisory, the functions of the central government over the playground of the finance and also local governance.
Mm-hmm. Andy, if you look at the overall reforms or reshuffle of the cabinet or the state council, I mean, the purpose, of course, not for this year, but for the entire next 5 years. The overall purpose of the government, obviously, to grow the economy and to stabilize the financial markets, but at the same time to grow it, of course, under increasing uncertainty globally. So in that sense, how do you see these reforms?
Well, I think these reforms are, of course, very significant because they involve the government, but they're only one piece because there's also a greater integration between the party and the government as well. And I think we're seeing a greater degree of accountability throughout the system and a greater integration between the party and the government. So, China, of course, is at a new stage of development. There are new challenges, but also new opportunities as well. And I think that organizations that cannot adapt structurally have much less of a chance of being successful in achieving their long-term goals. So I think we're at the beginning of a very significant institutional reform process that involves the government. But the bigger picture, of course, is that this is also a larger party government reform as well. And I think there'll be a lot to watch for.
Right. Well, on that note, we conclude today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.